That post-Cold War idea was based on interdependence, nations depending on one another. Are you going to have an AI, for the US, an AI for Europe, and an AI for China? There is a race to do better. There is a race to not let the other guy do better than you are. At some point, we're going to have to agree on standards, on regulations to make this as safe as possible. But in the meantime, we don't want to let any other nation do well.
Hi everyone, I'm here with Professor Ghez of HEC Paris. As an expert in international affairs and academic director of the executive program Doing Business in a Complex World, he helps leaders navigate through what we're experiencing right now, a moment where business, technology and politics collide in ways we've never seen before. Professor Ghez, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Ghez, if you'll indulge me in one brief exercise, in just one word, how would you characterize what we've seen unfold since the start of 2025?
Well, there'd be quite a few candidates, but if I have to pick one, I would choose transactional.
What brings you to that word?
So for a very long time, we saw the world through the prism of compromise, through the idea of a famous book called Getting to Yes. We speak, we try to separate problems from people, and ultimately we try to find creative solutions to problems that are in everyone's interests. This was the real deal in business, it was the real deal in diplomacy and in international relations. It's been a little while since we've seen this coming, but I think that the rise of populism, the rise of geopolitical tensions, makes the world far more transactional. It's not rules-based, it's not multilateral anymore, it's not about common standards and values, it's about an arm wrestling match to try to get a deal. A deal is not the same thing as a compromise, that's the transactionalism that we're seeing globally.
That's a fascinating point, bridge for the next question. So let's start with one of the biggest stories shaping global business right now. President Trump's new tariffs could add $640 billion in import costs, while China is rapidly pivoting to the global south. What interests me is how these simultaneous shifts are reshaping global trade. Are we seeing the end of the post-Cold War economic order?
Well, there's certainly a threat of fragmentation. That post-Cold War idea was based on interdependence, nations depending on one another, to the extent that they could potentially integrate their markets. That in theory, there would be one global market, the idea of globalization. Here we're seeing far more fragmentation. It is easy to think about this in two blocks, the United States trying to divorce China, so to speak, China trying to look for new allies, not always as smoothly as we believe, I think, in the West, but certainly trying to do this. And Europe in the middle, trying to figure out if its biggest know-how is multilateralism, how is it able to save it, and is it able to save it? So yes, the global trade map is completely fractured. It is not deglobalization, but a fractured globalization. And you can expect here far more obstacles to go global. Firms that will be able to are the ones that have a high premium, a high branding, but this is the type of trends that we are seeing fragmenting global trade and globalization altogether.
From the US stepping back in Ukraine, to the ongoing crisis in Gaza, to a caretaker government in Syria, geopolitics is reshuffling at an alarming pace. How do these conflicts impact international business leaders trying to plan for the next decade?
So these are three very striking and different crises, but they all lead to that same point, is that businesses used to believe they lived in an apolitical world, or that to some extent, money is money, business is business, and to some extent, politicians, global powers will do their things, but we can continue to evolve, down the line of business is business, the status quo, so to speak. When an American economist, Theodore Levitt, introduces in the early 80s the word globalization in conventional language, he really talks about a force that will take away the political interference. We're seeing that political interference come back. So what can businesses do? I think that what's important, or how does this influence them? I think what it's important is to say, all all of the business models that we've seen in the past, based on global flows, based on globalization, based on the existence of global markets, is being challenged. A lot of them don't have the same visibility at the very least, and a lot of them are starting to ask, can we think about supply chains in a better way? Can we think about our political relations in a better way? And ultimately, are we thinking about our markets in a better way? No more global markets, perhaps a bunch of local markets. We know the lessons of business. The ones closest to the consumer are those who win the day. The answers to that question may be very different today than it was 10 years ago.
Speaking of supply chains, the latest McKinsey report on supply chains revealed some sobering statistics. 90% of surveyed businesses faced digitalization challenges in 2024, and the average response time to disruptions is still 2 weeks. What does this tell us about the fragility or adaptability of global supply chains?
It says a whole lot that, COVID, Ukraine were perfect culprits of disruption. We thought to ourselves those were the causes of all of those disruptions in global supply chains that we witnessed. The numbers you mentioned suggest that crisis is not over. It happens far after COVID, happens far after the war in Ukraine, and it suggests there's something far more structural going on. Meaning digitalization should not be a response only to COVID, shouldn't be a response to geopolitical tensions, but it should be a response to structural transformations of globalization and the ability of these firms to overcome these challenges. Paul Donovan of UBS has this way of saying, supply chains are becoming more local, more simplified, and more digital in the sense that, we're not talking about reshoring. We're not necessarily talking about nearshoring. We're not necessarily talking about friendshoring anymore. Global supply chains are trying to not necessarily look for that efficiency, lowering cost, lowering risks as they did before. They're looking for more resilience. And this is, I think, an interesting element to see how they're shifting from a logic of efficiency to a logic of policy insurance and resilience and avoid disruption.
The same report shows that only 30% of boards deeply understand supply chain risks, while only 9% of companies are compliant with the new European sustainability regulations. What's the biggest blind spot leaders have when it comes to supply chain resilience?
I would tell you the biggest blind spot is that they lack imagination. Is that to a large extent, when you look at the complexities of these supply chains and the regulations, it's not just what the company is doing, it's not just what their suppliers are doing, it's what the suppliers of the suppliers are doing. And this can create some huge crises on your watch without you even knowing before it's too late. And I think lacking imagination means what? It means that, yes, there is risk mitigation, things that companies do very well. But I think there's also pushing this to more radical scenarios. This is not something that the human brain, trained to think linearly, does naturally. And this is, I think, a key skill to master in this complex world, something where you're going to have to look at not only your immediate risk, but the type of fragilities you have beyond these types of issues.
Drawing on this, for businesses, does this mean diversifying even more supply chain? Or is there a risk of overcorrecting, creating inefficiencies? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a debate among different industries, and that different industries might not have the same answer, especially that I don't think they all define diversifying in the same way. So the headline right now is saying, are we moving from supply chains that promote efficiency to supply chains that promote resilience? Efficiency is about reducing costs and risks. Resilience is about your policy insurance. That's the headline. And I think this is happening in a wide range of industries. Some other industries are still resisting this whole idea, saying it's still about efficiency, but in which case they're going to have to think about what supply chain risks mean in a global business environment characterized by all of the geopolitical risks that we mentioned.
The race for resources is heating up. India's trade is projected to grow by 6.4% annually, while China's trade with the West is declining. The EU is trying to balance competitiveness with sustainability. Is this a multipolar world in the making? And what role do emerging markets play in this new order?
Yeah. Multipolar, certainly, unless it's highly fragmented, in the sense that multipolar might be a very polite word to suggest that we have different blocks that coexist, that might have limited economic interactions, but not so many deep long-term economic relations. It's very interesting. China, the United States, we see the diverging forces. Europe, we see their ability to try to bring everyone together or remind people of the virtues of multilateralism. Then you have a group of countries, emerging countries. The economists call them the T25, ruthless pragmatism. Basically saying no sanctions on Russia, no picking sides on the US-Chinese tensions, but we want to talk to everyone and we want to continue having a global relationship. India fits perfectly well that description, especially that India has a very long history of non-alignment, one that it holds incredibly dear, and that it is revisiting today in a way that is striking. It is basically retelling that story of realignment, 21st century version. This is basically a shock of different narratives that we're seeing translate in trade blocs.
Meanwhile, we're dealing also with the ongoing climate crisis. We're seeing a stark divide, the EU doubling down on sustainability while the US withdraws from the Paris Agreement. How should global businesses navigate these conflicting regulatory environments?
So we know how Europeans would want this to happen. Europeans are basically saying we're setting the standard for the rest of the world. We can do that because we're a huge consumer market, nearly 500 million. And whatever a company does to fit that market, it doesn't make any sense to do something for Europe and do it differently anywhere else. I think there's going to be a real competition to set the standards, to set the norms. The Europeans have a know-how in doing this. Facing America that doesn't want to do this, I think it's going to be an interesting matchup. But again, probably in the short run, a source of fragmentation.
Shifting from trade to technology, the AI Action Summit in Paris saw massive investments, 150 billion euros from the European Union. Meanwhile, the US just launched the 500 billion Stargate project. Are we entering an AI arms race? And what does this mean for businesses?
It certainly looks like it. There's a question, again, here of fragmentation. Are we going to look at different blocks of norms? Technology used to obey the same rules. Different blocks of norms now? A key metaphor here is your plug. Are you going to have an AI, for the US, an AI for Europe, and an AI for China? China, by the way, is kind of a newcomer and a challenger with DeepSeek, able to do this open source and in a way that really challenges the existing models, generative AI models. Yes, indeed, there is a race. There is a race to do better. There is a race to not let the other guy do better than you are. And I think that there's going to be, again, kind of like on climate change, a tension. At some point, we're going to have to agree on standards, on regulations to make this as safe as possible. But in the meantime, we don't want to let any other nation do well. Businesses are probably going to have to adapt to very different local realities and to look at this in very different lenses. I can think of precedents that relate to issues related to sustainability, issues related to different types of norms and standards. It's going to be a very, very hard world to navigate going down the line.
Going back to our DeepSeek's emergence, it suggests AI innovation isn't just a West versus East story anymore. How might this technological multipolarity reshape business competition?
So it's reshaping competition at the fiercest and the most basic level, where you have one product, one incumbent, and then a bunch of new models coming after the incumbent and the initial product. Initial product being OpenAI, Claude being a longtime competitor, and then a bunch of newcomers, Mistral in France, DeepSeek being another one. What is interesting in all of this is that, yes, you have that basic competition from a market standpoint, but you also have a good branding. It is very, very telling to me that a lot of the focus on DeepSeek initially was about, the model's limitations when it came to talking about sensitive topics for China. It is also very telling that there was a big controversy over what DeepSeek was able to do and not do, whether it had told the full truth about its development in a country that faces sanctions from the United States when it came to GPUs, for instance. So it means there's the basic part of competition, the one we are most accustomed to, but all of the political and cultural interferences. A business executive that's wants to do well today, I think, is going to have to play with those two ideas, the classic management tools and the more political and geopolitical dimensions that we clearly see in this topic.
Given everything what we've discussed, from trade alignment to AI arms race, what's the most crucial capability leaders need to develop right now?
I would say two things: broaden your horizon and always find the right devil's advocate. Broaden your horizons means what? Means going to talk to a wide range of people in business, other industries, other sectors, other job functions, but other people who may not necessarily be in business. Academia, think tanks, diplomacy. I would even say artists might actually have a view of the world that you may be missing. Devil's advocate means being able to explain what you think and the other side as well. And I think this is important because in a dogmatic era, if you can't argue both sides of an argument, then it means you're probably not an expert in what you're saying. This means probably choose what you read carefully. I know in my case, it's The Economist. That keeps me honest. That doesn't always provide me with the view I agree with, but that keeps me honest because it always puts me in this place where I need to redemonstrate to myself, why do I not agree with the consensus? Broaden your horizons, act like your devil's advocate.
Good, nice piece of advice. One last thing, Professor Ghez, if we meet again a year from now, what's the one headline you hope we'll be maybe discussing?
Peace in the Middle East. As surprising as this may be, I think that in a transactional era, strikingly, it may be the very good time to get a wide range of stakeholders to talk to each other. And I think you must be ready because this may open up a wide range of avenues that we may not foresee to this day in terms of economic integration, in terms of a business landscape. At the very moment, the rest of the world is in turmoil.
Let's hope for the best. Thank you, Professor Ghez.
Thank you for having me.